in Mauritius. So Loretta will elaborate with us some of the latest developments on the regulatory front, such as the digital assets license and STOs, that is security tokens offerings. We've also got Paul Perrier with us today, who is the CEO and co-founder of Frankis Technologies, a very interesting company. Paul will be sharing a testimonial with us on the success of his company. So more on that later today. At the end of this webinar, we will be having a Q&A session. I'd like to say a few words quickly on that. So for those of you who are not familiar with Microsoft Teams platform, there is a Q&A section on your screen. I invite you to submit your questions on the chat box. And of course, we look forward to answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A session, which will be at the end of this webinar. So welcome again to all our speakers and participants. Without taking too much time, I'm going to start with Faraz, who will be making a presentation for us. So Faraz, I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Faraz?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Yes. Thank you, Rajiv, for this very good introduction. A very good morning and afternoon to all our panelists who have joined us today. It is a great opportunity to talk to all of you, albeit virtually. I borrow something from a colleague of mine, a word of wisdom, who said that, you know, during this current turmoil, when the world is at its knees due to the global pandemic, technology has been our biggest ally in getting us connected, in bringing us together. So we would leverage on this technological platform to share a little bit about Mauritius as an international financial center and what is the value proposition of Mauritius as a hub for fintech activities, especially going into the African continent. So my presentation, the articulation of my presentation during the next 10 minutes or so would be twofold. Firstly, I will talk about Mauritius as an international financial center, because fintech borrows from financial services sector, and fintech is the distribution of financial services. And the next part, I'll talk very specifically on the modalities that we have in place in our jurisdiction as a fintech hub. So let me begin. First of all, as Rajiv mentioned, I am from the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. I am from the Economic Development Board of Mauritius. May I kindly request participants to please mute their microphones when they are joining us, please, because I'm hearing some echo. I don't know if it is at your end as well. Now, as I was mentioning, the Economic Development Board is the apex entity by the government of Mauritius. It is a state organ. It is mandated by the government to work on strategic economic planning. Our second mandate is trade and investment promotion. We also work extensively on enhancing the business landscape in Mauritius to make it a conducive platform for international investors. And fourthly, we are mandated to work on the branding of the jurisdiction, be it for financial services sector, be it for manufacturing or any other activities or any other economic activity. So in a nutshell, Mauritius, we have a hybrid legal system borrowing from the British common law and the French Napoleonic Code. The GDP per capita is approximately $10,000. As per a recent World Bank's assessment, we are a high income country, but as you know, the pandemic has had a tremendous impact on the global economy, and Mauritius will not be spared. So we are foreseeing a drop in the GDP per capita, probably, noting how the global economy would fare over the next year or so. We have a very conducive time zone, which is GMT+4. we have a Westminsterian parliamentary system. We have free and fair elections every 5 years. We are one of the few countries in this part of the world that is rated as an investment grade by the Moody's rating agency. And we are the only financial center in Africa having an investment grade rating. We have an economic growth of 3.0%, and we have a population of 1.3 million of people. Our last court of appeal, and I think it is important for the audience to note, our last court of appeal is the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, the House of Lords in London, after our Supreme Court. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my first part of the presentation is going to be on Mauritius as an international financial center. We built upon 3 decades of experience in enhancing cross-border investment for the emerging markets. And in a way, in a nutshell, the Mauritius International Financial Center caters for 2 limbs of investors. Firstly, they are the multinational corporates and you know, big conglomerates around the world using Mauritius for their SPVs or for their investment holding entities investing in Africa, in India, in Asia, and other emerging markets predominantly. And the second limb is private wealth, or the services that we offer as a jurisdiction to the exceptionally affluent. So these 2 limbs are spread across 4 segments of services that we offer. So firstly, there is the cross-border investment and services, where we have regional headquarters scheme, regional headquarters products, treasury management products. We have limited partnerships, investment holdings. We are also known as you know, tacitly, we are known as the gold standard for fund administration and management. And later I'm going to be giving you some figures on funds. Secondly, there is the banking and insurance segment. We have conventional and Islamic banking facilities in Mauritius. We have also catered for investment banking activities, private banking, insurance and reinsurance, as well as captives in Mauritius. In terms of capital raising and listing opportunities in Mauritius, the Stock Exchange of Mauritius is a member of the World Federation of Exchanges. It is one of the few exchanges in the world that you can list, trade, and settle in a number of currencies, including Mauritian rupees, South African rands, pounds, and euros, and United States dollars. One thing which is very particular about the Stock Exchange of Mauritius is that you can list Euro bonds in Mauritius, and they can be denominated in any currency you want. So that prevents exposure to currency fluctuations. And then you have professional and support services, which is an ecosystem as enumerated in this slide. We have 19 domestic and international banks. The total assets of the banking sector is in excess of $35 billion. And as you're all aware, the international standards governing the banking architecture in the world is the Basel Convention. And the Basel III Convention requires a capital adequacy ratio of 12%. The capital adequacy ratio in Mauritius of the Mauritian banks is 19%, which means to say that our banks are very liquid and very resilient and very strong. Now, in terms of service providers, we have 3,000 professional accountants. I was informed, and I have it on good authority, that Mauritius has the most number of accountants in the world per square kilometers. We have 474 fund managers, 750 lawyers, but all in all, we have approximately 15,000 people, 13,500 people working directly in the financial services sector of Mauritius. I was mentioning it earlier, and I alluded to it. Mauritius has been the hub for multinational corporations and for international companies of domiciling their activities in Mauritius and investing in emerging markets. So we have 12,000 of those global business companies. Those are the companies which are based in the financial center of Mauritius and which are investing outside of Mauritius. Out of these 12,500 companies, we have 1,000 global funds, and the funds are administering and managing the assets under management are approximately $800 billion of dollars. We have 188 management companies in Mauritius, that is to say, the corporate service providers that handhold international investors and add value to their business and structure their businesses, amongst others. So Mauritius has been an ecosystem that has been adding value for private wealth, for trusts, for foundations, etc., and for investment holding entities, structuring of investments for over 3 decades now. And we are increasingly being used by development finance institutions like sovereign wealth funds, domiciling their funds in Mauritius and having impactful investments in the African continent. And this is something that we are very proud of. The use of Mauritius towards alleviation of poverty, towards increasing yield in crops, or even women empowerment in Africa. So most of the development finance institutions in the world, name it European Investment Bank, Proparco, No Fund, KfW from Germany, all of these sovereign wealth funds are using Mauritius to go into emerging markets and to go into the African continent. At this point in time, I would digress a little bit because most of you may have heard that Mauritius is currently on a list of high-risk jurisdictions of the European Union. And I thought I would share a little bit with you about what it is exactly and why we are in this list and when we are going to come out of this list. You would be aware that the International Standard Setting Organization for Anti-Money Laundering and Combating of Financing of Terrorism is governed by the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF. And the FATF has been reviewing the Mauritius jurisdiction since 2018 based on new parameters. They have 40 parameters and they started reviewing Mauritius on that. And they have 58 recommended actions. So when they started reviewing Mauritius, we were out of the 40 parameters that the FATF has, we were complied with only 14 of them, and very little in terms of recommended actions. And over 1 year, we already complied with 35 out of 40 of the recommendations and 53 out of 58 of the recommended actions. So that is what we have achieved within 1 year. And the Financial Action Task Force, noting the progress and noting the commitment of the government to address strategic deficiencies which they have highlighted in the jurisdiction, and seeing that within 1 year we have made significant progress, they placed us on a list, on a watch list, right, as they are doing with a number of other countries. But come a time when the European Union started doing the assessment of Mauritius, they took all the list of the Financial Action Task Force and they called it a list of high-risk jurisdiction. Now, we were adhering to a timeline of the FATF, which was until 2022, to address all the strategic deficiencies in our law and in our effectiveness in terms of implementation. But the European Union list was already out. And we said at the level of the government that, you know, we are going to prepone the timetable that we had agreed with the FATF Secretariat of 2022, and we are going to do it by the end of this year. And we have already submitted a progress report to the FATF. And as soon as the FATF is going to take cognizance of the progress that Mauritius has been making, and should the FATF be agreeable, we would be out of this watch list, and by consequence, we would be out of the European list. So I think that I would just share a little bit with you that probably by the end of this year, we should be okay in terms of making our case to the Financial Action Task Force and the European Union. But having said that, the jurisdiction has already implemented all the new laws in the latest State of the Union address, which we call the budget in Mauritius. We have amended a number of laws. We have had a new AML CFT Act that has been amended, and we also have a new, we also have announced a new financial crime code in Mauritius that is to comply with the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force. Now, having said that, let me move on to fintech, because the gist of today's presentation is going to be on fintech. So in the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about the value proposition of the Mauritius jurisdiction for fintech companies. We have very strong data protection laws in Mauritius, and they are actually GDPR compliant with the European Union. We have over 20,000 multilingual IT professionals. We have state-of-the-art technology platform in Mauritius, and we have continuous fiber optic connectivity in the jurisdiction. At the same time, technology moves extremely fast. It runs actually, and it is very hard for regulations to keep apace with technology. This is why the government in 2016 instituted what we call the Sandbox license. It functions as a proper sandbox as a proper license in Mauritius. Therefore, if you come to Mauritius, you get a license for all your fintech, for any of your fintech activity in Mauritius. You're able to serve the domestic market, and based on this, once you test your product on the domestic market, should you wish to, you can access the African continent. The beauty of the Sandbox license in Mauritius, it is that it is one line in the Economic Development Board Act. It says that wherever there is a fintech activity for which there is not a formal regulation, a formal legal framework, a formal law, the EDB would take that under the Sandbox, and they would provide you with a license for your specific activity. There have been a number of startups and fintech projects. Paul is going to give a testimonial later on as a peer-to-peer lending platform, but we have licensed crowdfunding platforms, crowd lending platforms, cryptocurrency exchanges in Mauritius, digital wallets, initial coin offerings, and later Loretta is going to talk about the digital asset marketplace as well as the securities token offering. But notwithstanding the fact that we have a sandbox in Mauritius, we have roped in bright minds like Loretta to write laws and regulations for the jurisdiction so that we can be one step ahead when it comes to fintech and when it comes to fintech regulations in the country. At the same time, the government has spared no effort in creating the buoyant ecosystem for fintech activities in Mauritius. First thing first, we said that if we are going to have to encourage fintech activities for our young, bright minds in Mauritius, we have to have an ecosystem, we have to have an association which regroups them. At the same time, the government was of the view that when we are going to start encouraging international investors, international fintechpreneurs to come to the jurisdiction, we would need to open up borders, and this we have done in terms of opening up the borders for work and leave permits in Mauritius, and these are given by the Economic Development Board. But at the same time, the government was of the view that we need to create a fintech association, and the EDB actually was the SPV that ceded capital to the fintech association from the government to create a member organization, a membership-driven organization and incubation lab, but also as a policy advocacy. And the idea is that we have common working spaces in the FinTech Association. We have incubators in the FinTech Association so that we can handhold fintechpreneur in the jurisdiction. At the same time, there needs to be a convergence from the different regulators. So the Bank of Mauritius, the Economic Development Board, and the Financial Services Commission, which is the equivalent of the Securities Exchange Commission of Australia, have worked together in a National Regulatory Sandbox License Committee for all the licenses that the EDB gives out in terms of of fintech activities in Mauritius. And I'm going to end on this, ladies and gentlemen, as a nutshell, why Africa and why Mauritius. Rajiv alluded to it earlier on, but I think over 330 million of adult African citizens lack access to formal and conventional banking and financial services. So it creates a business case for disruption. The mobile penetration and internet penetration in Africa is exemplary. And the largest segment in the digital payment segment has a transactional value of $46 billion in Africa. So in a nutshell, Africa is the next frontier of growth. Africa is the next El Dorado, especially when it comes to fintech activities. And Mauritius has been playing as, because we are part of Africa, we are a founding member of the African Union. We have been playing the necessary enabler, as with other financial centers in Africa, including Johannesburg, including Kigali and Casablanca. So we are here to drive prosperity in the African continent and to ensure and mitigate risk that there is in mainland Africa. So with this, Rajiv, over to you to take this forward. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, Faraz. It's good to hear, how Mauritius is playing a key role as a fintech hub in Africa. And thanks for sharing the update on the Financial Access Action Task Force, the status of Mauritius. So we'll be hearing more on the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub from Michal and from Loretta, who will elaborate more on the digital assets license. But before that, we're going to move on to Rebecca Schot-Guppy, CEO of Fintech Australia. Rebecca will make a presentation to provide us with an overview on the Australian FinTech landscape. So Rebecca, welcome and over to you. Thank you.
Here this afternoon, and I welcome the opportunity to present to Fintech Africa. I'll just upload my slides and then I'll get started.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry, my screen appears to have frozen, everyone.
It's okay. Sorry, I think you're on mute, Rebecca. You need to unmute. Yeah, thank you.
You can't see slides, can you? Or you can?
No, we can't. As again, can you help to put the slides, please? Yeah, here we go. I think it's we can see the slides now.
Perfect. Thank you, and thank you again for the opportunity to present today. For those that don't know, I'll just give a little bit of the background on Fintech Australia. Fintech Australia is the peak member body for Australian FinTech. We've been around now for 4 years. We started with 50 Australian FinTechs coming together after meeting at Innovate Finance in the UK and realising that they would have more success lobbying government if they came together as one industry association rather than lobbying individually. And over the next 4 years, we've grown to over 300 members. And we are known for our policy and advocacy work. So Fintech Australia is the voice of the Australian fintech community. We are a member-driven organisation building an ecosystem of Australian fintechs to advance the global economy and innovation culture. Fintech Australia works to create a strong community and foster connections while supporting innovation and advocating for regulations to create the best environment for fintechs to thrive. We have 3 pillars that we work to, and our first pillar is one that we're most known for, and that's our promotion and our advocacy on behalf of our members. So key bits of legislation that we've got changed are things like the JobKeeper, which is part of the stimulus package for COVID-19 in Australia. So we got changes to make sure that higher growth businesses got access to the regime. We've been instrumental in things like the regulatory sandbox, open banking, access to the fast payments rails in Australia, and we're instrumental in the equity crowdfunding regime, which we now have 3 major players in that space, being Equitise, Virtual and On Market. Our other pillar is our education and our connect pillar, and this is all about helping our community connect with each other, whether that's connecting our corporate partners with our fintechs or our fintechs with each other, or it's educating our wider database on the membership that we have. And some of the initiatives we run are 5 fintechs on a Friday, really highlighting our membership, a member spotlight series. And this year we've really highlighted our members through our Fintech Australia podcast. And if you haven't had a chance, I would highly recommend going to the App Store and viewing the Fintech Australia podcast. There's some excellent founders and some excellent stories for you all to connect with. Grow is our last pillar, and this is all about helping our members grow, which is either helping them expand overseas by connecting them with a regulator or helping them network with each other at our 2 major events, being Intersect and the Finnies. We represent a wide range of subsectors in fintech. We see fintech being more broad than just your lending, your capital markets and your wealth management. In our space, we include insurance, insurtechs and regtechs in our thing, and we also have co-working spaces as members and VCs as members as well. I've touched a little bit on this, but more recently, our policy work has been on the Committee of Financial Technology and Regulatory Technology. So Fintech Australia made 2 large submissions to the government to actually help set the national roadmap for Australian fintech. We're doing a big piece of work at the moment, but we will be able to demonstrate that about 80% of our recommendations made it into the final interim report. Other things I've already touched on, we've been involved in the enhanced regulatory sandbox, the ASIC e-payments code, the ACCC home loan price inquiry, the future directions for consumer data right. And for those on the call, our consumer data right is open banking, but it's more broad than open banking. It's pretty much open data and open finance. It gives people the power to own, essentially, my data is now my data. So the consumer data right will be open energy, open telco and open banking in its first iteration, and then you'll see it move into superannuation, insurance and other verticals. Over time at Fintech Australia, we've been partnering with EY on an annual fintech census, and that census gives us key metrics and data about the sector. And that data is really important for the policy and advocacy work that we do. But more importantly, it shows them how the industry is maturing as we get older. And some of that key data is, that 80% in our 4th year of doing the census, 80% of fintechs are post-revenue, 23% of fintechs are profitable. We continue to see the percentage of females in their workforce increase. We continue to see the maturity of the businesses and how long the age of the companies rise. And then we continue to see the same sort of metrics in relation to global expansion. So it's pretty consistent data that UK, United States and New Zealand are the top 3 across the last few censuses. Basically, our sector is dominated by Sydney and Melbourne. So 80% of the sector is in the 2 financial hubs, which makes sense given both 2 of the major banks are in Melbourne and 2 of the major banks in Sydney. And then you've got a really strong superannuation sector in Melbourne, and Sydney is known as the financial services capital of Australia. So 55% of fintechs are in Sydney and about 30 in Melbourne, making up the majority of our network. As I don't know if this is the same in Africa, but 80% of our fintechs actually get their customers from incumbents or banks or professional services firms. So it's not necessarily about disruption in the market. For us, it's all about collaboration. So how can we build those relationships and partnerships to make sure that efficiency and regulatory compliance happens, or customers get a better product and offering. The other thing that's really important to note is when we did the census, there was a huge Royal Commission into banking. So at this time, there was, overall positive sentiment on how the banking relationships would improve. Now, we haven't necessarily seen that, and that's got a lot to do with the fact that COVID happened. And as a result of COVID, a lot of banks in the Australian market particularly pulled a lot of their innovation projects and really focused on their core business offering. So I'm hoping when we get the data that won't have gone down substantially, but I suspect it will. The other thing that to note, when we did this census, there was a bit of lack of positivity towards the government, but I think that's changed. The appointment of our first ever FinTech financial services and superannuation minister being Jane Hume, and the inquiry led by Senator Bragg to come up with a national strategy for FinTech, I think have really changed the attitude towards government and government support of the sector. We're really proud of our members at Fintech Australia. So I talked about before that we have 300 FinTech members, and we have probably 90% of the biggest FinTechs in the country as members. And this year we created a little bit of a graphic on, our top 63 Fintech Australia members surveyed, and 51 to 200 is the average employees for each of those 63. In those 63 members, there was over 3 billion worth of capital raised. There was an average increase of 50 to 600% of revenue. 4 of those fintechs sold products to the Big 4 or international banks. 22 new products launched. There was 3 that received accreditations or licenses. One of those, importantly, being Frollo, who was the first fintech to connect to our CDR and open banking. We had multiple companies launch into other markets, and we had 4 of our lenders participate in the government guarantee scheme, which was part of the COVID stimulus package. I would just like to thank Fintech Africa again for having us, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for the excellent presentation, Rebecca. I think we all agree that Australia has one of the world's most exciting and dynamic fintech industries. In fact, if we look at the list of top 100 fintech companies globally, I think 7 of them are from Australia, which shows that Australian fintech companies have been successful not just in Australia, but also in the international markets as well. We've seen a growing number of Australian fintech companies rapidly globalizing across multiple jurisdictions, such as Afterpay and Airwallex. So our message today is how can we sow the seeds for the next Afterpay of Africa, given that Africa is a fertile ground for fintechs. So thank you very much again for your insights, Rebecca. I will now turn to Michal Szymanski, CEO of the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub. Michal, you are also a board member on the Africa FinTech Network. So obviously you've got a lot of experience working with the fintech ecosystem in Africa. We hear a lot about how successful the M-Pesa of Kenya has been. You know, in some of the universities, it is being used as case studies. And also how Africa has become the global leader in mobile money transfer services. Now, Michael, before I ask you to tell us about the role of the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub, could you please share with us your insights on the evolution of fintech in Africa, how it is changing lives in Africa, and what are the opportunities for fintech in Africa? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Rajiv. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody who's come to join us today. So my name is Michal Szymanski. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a brief overview from Africa perspective. You know, Africa, everybody has been talking about Africa over the last 10 years as an opportunity, as the next frontier, but only have we seen kind of the deal flows, the technology, the adoption of technology happening in the last 5 years. So, you know, for Africa as a continent, 1.3 billion people, a lot of the population is still underbanked or unbanked. There was a massive need to start including the people who've been forgotten by the financial system or have been excluded for various sorts of needs, you know, from informal traders to individuals who can't participate in a digital economy. So what we've seen over the last 4 to 5 years is not only a growth in the small business sector in Africa, but also investment into the continent because of the opportunities that do exist. So if you look at kind of the last statistics, you know, funding into startups in Africa has increased over 10-fold in the last 4 years. Over 55% of that investment is directly into fintech startups. So a lot of focus has been towards that. And for me, it's Africa's different when it comes to the rest of the world. A lot of the solutions that are developed are very user-centered. Is because the challenges that exist on the ground from an infrastructure perspective, from a social context, or whatever the various principles are, we have slightly different needs to kind of the rest of the more developed markets, if you will. And therefore, the fintech solutions that have been developed or are growing are actually addressing those needs that exist in the various ecosystems. So what we've seen is a massive shift in the fintech environment in Africa. We're seeing a lot more investment, not only from locally, but from abroad coming into the space. And we saw, I think earlier in this year or towards the later last year, kind of the first fintech unicorn coming out of Africa. You know, for far too long, I've been all over the world for the last couple of years seeing fintech uniforms all coming from all over the world, and yet Africa was the dark continent. There was nothing on any map. But it's nice to see that now people are starting to take notice of what is actually happening on the ground. And, you know, things such as mobile wallets, remittance, these type of technologies have really brought down not only kind of the ease of doing those sort of transactions and bringing the people on board, but fundamentally in Africa, it's also about a cost factor. You know, bringing down those costs, because that becomes a barrier. And to be honest with you, as a financial system that almost discourages or discriminates because you don't have any money in your bank account, is kind of what fintech is there to solve. So we're seeing a real shift towards the space from the continent. We're seeing a lot more ideas and innovations driven locally. We're seeing a greater collaboration between the various jurisdictions. So 54 countries, over 2,000 dialects. You know, in Uganda, for example, we have 74 languages, and they use English, which is not the native first language for anyone there, as a means of communication. There are various challenges that exist. You know, you go to Nigeria, it's over 250. So each country is quite unique. And that's why we're seeing a lot of large corporates who are trying various fintech innovations or startups deploying their solutions kind of fail in the various markets because they come in from an external perspective. We've got the solution for you, and this is what you need, as opposed to greater collaboration with the individuals on the ground. You know, so to give you an example, everybody talks about M-Pesa. What very few people don't realize is they tried the same model in South Africa, and it failed within 13 months. Okay, it kind of just shows you the uniqueness of each kind of country and jurisdiction out there. So over the last 3 years, the various jurisdictions and my counterparts mandated by the government to build kind of the local ecosystem within the jurisdictions. We've gotten together. So at the moment, 32 African countries sit around the table and we discuss, the challenges faced in the various jurisdictions, but also how do we enhance an open collaboration model and the working and helping each other out when it comes to specifically the fintech environment, whether it's from regulations to startups to even academia and capacity building. So Mauritius was nominated for the board of the African FinTech Network. So we're proud to sit on there with South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and much larger jurisdictions. But the purpose for us there is that, we are working together. We are collaborating more across borders. We're breaking down kind of the barriers that existed specifically, and we're assisting each other on the various regulatory hurdles that exist. Moving from market to market, it could be quite challenging. And one of the things we're potentially working on is could potentially there be an exportable license to make sure that companies who want to operate in Africa could get one license that's recognized between multiple jurisdictions. So we've seen a very rapid revolution and evolution of this space in the continent, and there's still a lot of opportunities to happen or to be had on the ground. So, this conversation could take 4 hours, and we can deep dive it, and probably over a few more beers. But I think we're seeing that the gist of the matter is we are seeing a very rapid, not evolution, revolution happening in Africa at this point in time, to the point where, even crypto is being used as a means of payment by small businesses on the ground because there's not enough liquidity in the local marketplace or the devaluation of the currency locally. So we really are seeing a fast-tracked pace happening on the continent.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think you mentioned a very important point regarding the amount of investments secured in the fintech or blockchain sector of Africa. Now, one of the major problems that a lot of fintech startups face is access to capital. But I think it's a little bit different in Africa because we've seen a lot of interest from venture capital investors, especially the big global players, the likes of Visa, MasterCard, Goldman Sachs, and even Alipay. They're all investing heavily in the fintech sector of Africa, which shows that venture capital investors believe in the fintech opportunities in Africa. Now, my second question to you, Michal, is about the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub. Can you tell us about the role of the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub and what sort of services and opportunities it can provide to fintech entrepreneurs? More especially, how can the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub assist Australian fintech companies, who are with us today to expand into Africa? Thank you.
Awesome. So I'll try to keep the info very short on this, but bottom line is we were created through a budgetary measure through the Ministry of Finance, and we work very closely with the Mauritius Economic Development Board. And our mandate is very, very simple. Is how do we build and consolidate the local ecosystem with the viewpoint of building the Singapore of Africa, if you will. And the second one is, how do we, being the hub, requires you to have a very external focus with the rest of the continent. So how do we engage the other countries, the other jurisdictions to help promote and build a sense of the Singapore element on the ground, and how do we service the rest of the continent or the rest of the continent coming to us and exporting their solutions. So that was kind of the thinking around the budgetary measure. I think it was 3 years ago now. We've been around just under kind of 2-year mark. And our role effectively is a facilitator and not-for-profit, which aims to identify the challenges or the blockages or the constraints in the ecosystem, put together solutions that unblock those constraints, and then hand it over to the rest of the ecosystem so they can work together in order to solve those challenges through an open collaboration model. So very similar to Fintech Australia. We focus on 4 key kind of things. 1 is regulation, 2 is capacity and skills. And I'm sure everybody's aware, and I saw a research paper earlier in the year, apparently by next year, the world's going to be 5 million coders short. In the space we're in, we require the right talent and the right youth coming through the system. So how do we engage with the youth? How do we retrain our existing population? The third kind of pillar is innovation and incubation. So we're very proud to officially have received our being recognized as a FinTech incubator in Mauritius by the Research Council. And the last one is kind of from a deal flow perspective is, could we set up funds locally in Mauritius that service the African FinTech space and individuals can take advantage of it. And just to your earlier point, Rajiv, it's the investment element and the VC space. I'm just going to make people very aware that it's very different in Africa than the rest of the world. We have a lot of interest from across the globe looking for big ticket items. We've had interest from the Middle East via some large institutions who would like to come into a continent with 50 million USD investments. And we're saying that is not Africa at this stage. Investments in Africa, we've got a lot of good innovations that solve various challenges, but it's the 250K US to the 1 million US mark that we really need to make sure that we have enough of those investments so we're able to grow the pipeline towards that much larger picture. Yes, we've had our first unicorn. I think OPay from Nigeria raised, I think, now they're valued at $1 billion. But that's almost an exception to the rule as opposed to kind of the norm. So we've got a lot of great innovations, even coming from abroad into the continent. But the level of investment is actually much lower, and it actually goes much further. I was having a chat with a VC out of the UK, and they're saying, listen, Michal, in the UK, we can, for £2 million, we get a pre-idea startup. For £500,000 in Africa, I get a company that's already making a profit. Right? So obviously there's opportunity there, and we still, there's massive opportunity from a VC and the investor perspective.
Excellent, Michal. Thank you very much. And lastly, can I ask you, what is the value proposition of the Mauritius jurisdiction in the area of fintech?
I think Faraz alluded to the point earlier. From an RSL perspective, I still to this day believe that we've got the Ferrari of the industry. I mean, we've only got in Africa, I think there's a handful of jurisdictions who have a Sandbox license. And the way it's structured, we would put it on par with the FCA and the MAS out of Singapore one in terms of the backbone of it. But I think it's more than that. And I think it's also more than just the beaches. A lot of people come to Mauritius for the beach life and amazing beer. But this place is God's gift to mankind. But at the end of the day, we've got the right environment, the right treaties, the right relationships, the right ecosystem and environment to make sure that things actually happen on the ground. Even from my home jurisdiction, I'm sure a lot of you would have recognized my South African accent. We've got challenges. We've got real challenges on the ground. We're some amazing fintechs, world-class fintechs, but there's still a lot of kind of silos approach. There's still not a sandbox. The Reserve Bank is working on it at the moment, but there are still various challenges that exist in the various jurisdictions. Mauritius doesn't have those. Those limiting factors that could impact the attracting of talent, the setting up of the industry. So I think we've got enough good things happening for us now. The relationships we've built on the backbone, and I'm sure Faraz will share his presentation and everybody can get a much greater overview of the why. But from a personal perspective, and why I'm here is because with a small shift, this country can be the Singapore of the African continent. And with all that entails, from the innovations, from putting together a hub that is world-class, that does attract foreign players. I mean, we've got members from 7 different countries around the world, from States to Germany. We actually have an Australian FinTech that's a member of the hub, and we work very closely with our members to say, how do we, A, demystify the local environment, but B, also, how do we demystify the African environment? Because to be honest with you, it's still probably a little bit of a Wild West. Regulation is fragmented. If you look at Ethiopia, which is currently the new gold rush, if you want to call it that, with government, 100 million people, privatization, first privatization of the banking space and the telco space. But there's no formal regulation, and you're having massive players such as Alipay moving into an environment where no formal regulation actually exists. So how do we collaborate? How do we work with the various industry stakeholders? And then how do we make sure that we are able to add value? Because through companies such as, for example, Paul, who's a rock star who you'll be hearing from very shortly. If they win, the ecosystem wins. There'll be more entrepreneurs from across Africa who will want to have innovation, be entrepreneurs, participate in a digital economy, and that's what we want to achieve and drive for.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michal. For those of you who are interested to learn more on how the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub can assist you, please feel free to get in touch with Michal and his team. So we're going to move on to our next topic, which is regulation. I will now turn to Loretta Joseph. Loretta, this is your area of expertise. You are probably well known for your contribution towards shaping the regulatory framework in many countries. I understand that you've written fintech legislations for 9 countries. Now, Loretta, you are the fintech advisor to the Financial Services Commission, which is the Mauritian government's regulator for non-banking financial activities and global business as well. Could you please share with us a bit about the work that you've been doing with the FSC and elaborate some of the latest developments in the legislative frameworks pertaining to fintech, such as the digital assets license and STOs, that is security tokens offerings? Thank you.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Yes, I'm Australian, so I sit in a very lucky spot. I live in the beautiful island of Mauritius, but I'm Australian. I have a great background in fintech, especially in blockchain and regulation of these emerging technologies. I am the senior advisor to the FSC, which is the Financial Services Commission of Mauritius. We're the non-bank regulator. I'm also a member of the regulatory committee on fintech-driven and innovation-driven financial services for Mauritius. So that's a membership. We have 2 members of the House of Lords. We sit with ministries, central bank governor, obviously the Financial Services Commission, and we look at the regulatory framework and how to change that Mauritius. So I came to Mauritius, I think, in February 2018. I was asked by the then CEO of the Financial Services Commission to come with the group that I just told you about and have a total overhaul of the regulatory environment in Mauritius. So we did. We have been very, very on the front foot of writing regulation, probably in the world, to be honest, in things like digital assets. So I came in 2018. Very quickly, we looked at the regulatory framework. We brought out a communique that says digital assets exist. Things like cryptocurrencies are a subset of a digital asset. So we have it's investor class only for sophisticated investors. So that's an important thing, I think, in how we categorise a digital asset. We then went on, because it was something that really concerned me. How does one hold a custody of a digital asset? How do I hold a Bitcoin? How do I hold something that's not tangible, that is decentralised, that is all over the world? So we came up with the custody licence for digital assets specifically. Then we wrote at the beginning of this year, we now have a proper licensing regime for security tokens, which is effectively just digitalised security, and for the platforms in which they are traded upon. At the moment, I am currently writing the digital asset marketplace, i.e. the licensing requirements that will be required for a cryptocurrency exchange. I refuse to call them exchanges because they're not. All they are is places that buyers and sellers. And we also recently, in the last month, we released proper licensing for peer-to-peer lending. So we've been very, very, very on the front foot of regulation. I think it's important for fintechs to understand that, no regulation is not good. Over-regulation is bad. And it's very hard for regulators to be to look at technology, but technology should be agnostic. So I've spent a lot of my life in financial markets the last 30 years in the digital asset space. Since 2014, I've been quite active in Australia.
11 hours.
I'm glad it's 11. I've been active in Australia and a number of other countries in the world. Africa is an interesting one because I think for all the companies out there in fintech, you need to understand that to build your business, what do you need? You need customers. So, I think Mauritius sits in a really interesting spot because we do sit between India and Africa, and they are the largest growing markets in the world. But also at the same time, it's important that you are regulated in a way that gives you a coverage of the law. So you're regulated, so you know what the law says, you understand what your requirements are, and you follow them. So we've been very cognizant of that. So responsible regulation is what we do. We bring in all the stakeholders. When we write regulation, we just don't do it here at the regulator. We have the central bank, we have, who's the other regulator, the Financial Services Commission. We bring in members of the ecosystem. We bring in the Solicitor General, the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is crimes people, and we all look at it in a very holistic manner to make sure that the regulations we're writing are purpose-built for the next century. I do a lot of work around Africa as well. I do sit as advisor to the African Hub. I've been doing a lot of work around regulation in Africa with a number of regulators, and we're hoping, and we just did one recently with India, so we're hoping that the regulatory framework that we build in Mauritius, that we can roll out to these other jurisdictions. I think it's interesting to note that the regulation that I've written is all common law. And if you look around the Commonwealth, the English gave us the Commonwealth, you have 53 countries. So I write regulation because I understand that if we can have uniform regulation around 53 countries, predominantly India, and a lot of those countries are sitting in Africa, we can really leapfrog some of the regulatory problems and hurdles that we have in a lot of the larger countries where you have these very, very much so legacy systems. So if you look at the US, they have different regulations and across states. You look at the European Union, it's a big jar of spaghetti. Australia has one regulator and one government and one central bank like we do here in Mauritius, but it's still common law. So I've been very grateful to be given this opportunity to hopefully change the landscape for the 21st century, because Africa predominantly is been unbanked, but she's also the biggest adopter of fintech, as is India. So you want to come to Mauritius, you have responsible regulation. You will have to fall within the guise of the law, but we have been very responsible in the way we've written our regulation. And you also, from this tiny little island sitting in the middle of the Indian Ocean, get the ability to go into markets which you can test your products on, because at the end of the day, fintech has been well adopted in the emerging world. I would say less by the incumbents and more by the people that live in these continents, because it's been a necessity. So financial technology has come out of predominantly telephone technology in Africa and India. That's going to continue. So your biggest markets are not going to be Australia, Canada, UK, they're going to be Africa and India. So good luck. We would welcome you here, and all the licenses that I've talked about are actually listed on the Financial Services Commission webpage. If you go under the news or licenses, you will see all the licenses that I've referred to.
Thank you very much, Loretta. It's good to see that there's a lot of progress being made at the FSC towards building the regulatory regime to position Mauritius as a fintech hub in Africa. Now, I'd like to ask you a second question. Obviously, Loretta, you are among the very few people who's got a lot of experience working for both Australia and Mauritius as well. You've also advised the Australian government to develop the ecosystem for blockchain and fintech. And I think you were part of Blockchain Australia for quite some time, and you were also the advisor to the Premier of South Australia. So my point is, you are very familiar with both fintech ecosystem in Australia and Mauritius as well. So I'd like to ask you, how would it be beneficial for Australian companies to use the Mauritius jurisdiction for fintech from a regulatory perspective? Thank you.
So as I said before, the important thing is for companies that are looking to expand is that you don't want to go to countries that have no regulation, because that's a zero-sum game. You need to go to countries that have a similar regulation to where you come from, but also regulation that is not stifling innovation. It's a very fine line. We walk the path of being a regulator. How do you protect the consumers and investors is why regulators exist, but how do you allow entrepreneurs to innovate and do that within the guise of the law? So that was why we set up the Sandbox. I think it's one of the best sandboxes working. Faraz sits on that, I sit on it. We have the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Mauritius, we have the Financial Services Commission CEO, we have the Chairman. It is chaired by Lord Anthony St John, who is a member of the House of Lords. He's the committee select head of the AI committee. He's done a lot of work in Africa. He is the African attaché to the Queen. So we have the Financial Intelligence Unit, and we come in once a month. We meet with the Sandbox and we go, all right, so this needs to be regulated by the Bank of Mauritius. This needs to be regulated by the Financial Services Commission, because we have two different regulators, the bank and non-bank. And then we sit down and we we meet every month and we go through our existing pipeline and what we have, and that has served us very well in the last couple of years. Funkies will tell you about that, I'm sure. But I think it's important that you go to a jurisdiction that has sensible regulation. You're not going to be able to break the law in Mauritius. You know, we're very cognizant of money laundering, terrorism, financing requirements for us globally, but we're also very cognizant that, you know, Mauritius is a very small country. What do we have? We have financial services, and COVID has shown us that, you know, tourism and travel for all of us, as we all sit here on webinars, is gone for a very long time. But we have always been, as a country, on the front foot of having 1.6 million people. You know, we're a tiny little island, and Madagascar sits next to us with more resources than any other country in Africa, and we have the least, but we have the highest GDP. So, yeah, we are a financial services hub. We're also a global business centre. You know, the Europeans look at us as being very European. India looks at us as being very Indian, and Africa looks at us as being very African, and China very Chinese. So we're this incredible small melting pot that works. We have been in financial services, as Faraz said, for 30 years, and we have to be innovative, because if we're not, we can't go and, you know, build a manufacturing sector to make cars. We need to help promote the growth of entrepreneurs and educate those in Africa, and that's what we're trying to do. So you may see us as a tiny little country, but sitting between Africa and India and using technology can mean that we can leapfrog and help tech companies in fintech get into these markets that give you customers, as I said.
Thank you very much, Loretta. And so my last question for you today is, would you like to share with us what are the upcoming fintech initiatives in Mauritius? So basically, you know, what is the way forward, please? Thank you. So
as I said, at the moment, we're writing the digital asset marketplace licensing requirements that will be out very soon. As I said, I'm a member of the FinTech and Innovation Driven Financial Services. We are re-meeting again because we did our first plan for the Prime Minister, which is in 2018, to write the regulatory framework around digital assets. We're now going to start looking at other emerging techs like AI, big data, how all these emerging technologies fit in with the Internet of Things into what FinTech looks like in the next 10, 20 years. I'm not looking at regulations that other countries are looking at that are predated. We're looking at post-dated. So things like DeFi, to me, is a big concern because decentralized finance, these things are going to get very interesting for regulators, because regulators often struggle with technology. We've tried not to. We've been very collaborative in the way that we've approached our regulation, and we will continue. So as I said, the digital asset marketplace will start looking at things like DeFi, other trends that we see in fintech, and there are plenty of them, and they come up every week. I mean, I think it's funny, I'm 51, so to try and keep up with the new fintech technologies that I see come into the market, so some of the more incumbent regulators that are around, around the world are trying and struggling to keep up. But we're also very collaborative with other regulators, because we all don't have the answers to any of this. So the more we as the regulators work together, the better it is for you as the ecosystem, and the better regulations that you'll have to let you innovate and to build your companies and help in fintech globally.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing your insights with us on the regulation side, Loretta. With that, I'd like to thank all our speakers for sharing their insights with us today. We will now move on to Paul Perrier, who is the CEO of Fintech Technologies Limited, who will be sharing a testimonial with us. Now, Paul, you are the founder of the first licensed crowd lending platform that allows individuals and corporates to lend directly to small businesses. Would you like to share with us how you started this project and what has been your experience in the Mauritius jurisdiction, please? Sorry, I think you're on mute.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Fintech, as you said, is a crowd lending platform for SMEs. We connect directly through our platform local SMEs with investors who lend directly to these SMEs. FundKiss has grown with a Mauritian ecosystem. It's an ecosystem which has developed a lot over the last 2 years. I will give you a few milestones, but if I can resume FundKiss journey so far, it has, in 2 words, it has been all about collaboration with the authorities, be it the EDB, FSC, Financial Services Commission, or the Bank of Mauritius, and the other stakeholders. And the second word is timing. Why? Because in March 2016, we participated in the first incubation program, which was launched in Mauritius by Turbine, which is a local incubator, where we were able to pitch our idea of launching a crowd lending platform in Mauritius. But after this incubation program, which was great, 2 questions arise. Okay, the jury liked the idea. Everyone could see the potential. But from an idea, where do you go? Where do you start? Knowing that there was no regulation for our activity, and also that we were going to go on a market which is huge and where you have legacy institutions which are there, and this market is the SME loan market. So that's where the game changer arrived in July 2016, when the government of Mauritius announced in its budget the introduction of the regulatory sandbox license under the Economic Development Board. And for me, this is a major it was a major announcement and policy and statement from the government, because it has allowed activities for which the regulatory framework did not exist in Mauritius to operate and to show the benefits of these new business models. In July 2017, we were the first company startup to obtain a regulatory sandbox license, and we were able to operate. In December 2018, we did our seed funding. We raised about 500,000 Australian dollars. It's equivalent to 15 million rupees in Mauritius. And in March 2019, we joined the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub and the African Crowdfunding Association. So when I talked earlier about collaboration and timing, with these few dates, I give you this example and the power of this collaboration. So to date, we have financed about 75 projects for a total loan production of about 1.2 million Australian dollars, which is equivalent to 36 million rupees. We have also secured some key partnerships. For instance, in the last budget in June 2020, the Minister of Finance has identified crowd lending, so our activity, as a new mechanism to boost SME financing. And after this announcement, FundKiss had secured a partnership, a collaboration with SME Equity Fund, which is an institutional investor, who will lend alongside our retail investors on all the projects put on our platform. They will take 10% of every project put online. We can see also that the learning curve we had over the last 2 years is starting to bear the fruits, because now we see that the projects are funded more quickly. For instance, last Friday we put a big project about around 2 million rupees, 70,000 Australian dollars, which was funded in less than 3 hours. Today we are also putting online a big project, and we expect it to be funded pretty quickly. So going forward, what are we going to do? We will continue to work more closely with institutional investors. because we need to collaborate with them to be able to scale up faster. We will transition to the peer-to-peer lending rules, which has been gazetted in last month. So we will need to transition from the regulatory sandbox license to the peer-to-peer lending rules. We will also have a new platform. So we are investing massively in technology. And we will also do our Series A, so our next round of funding to finance our future development. So, and we are going to continue we are doing all this to continue to make the experience of financing faster and easier for Mauritian SMEs.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Paul. It's good to see how your business is making a positive difference to small businesses in Mauritius. Thanks again for sharing your insights with us. We will now move on to the Q&A session. I can see that we have got some really interesting questions. We've got a question from Nick. I'm just going to read out quickly the question so that our speakers might be able to jump in to answer the questions. So from Nick, a couple of questions, please, for the Q&A session. The first one is, which banks in Mauritius are able to pay or receive from digital asset exchanges? I'm going to read all the questions, and then we can answer the questions based on the expertise of the speakers. The second one would be, which banks or custodian in Mauritius have digital asset wallets that Faraz mentioned? Which digital exchanges are in Mauritius? How many fintech businesses have been awarded the innovation tax holiday to be attracted to Mauritius? And lastly, we've got the FSC has rules which allowed for digital assets and secure token offerings. The Bank of Mauritius still does not allow this. How does a company with the FSC digital asset license open a bank account in Mauritius? So Faraz, would you like to lead on one of the questions?
Yes, thank you, Rajiv. I'll take the first one. Which banks are able to pay or receive from digital asset exchanges? You know, as a rule of thumb, when we grant a sandbox license and subsequently when we are going to grant full-fledged licenses at the level of the FSC or the Bank of Mauritius, one of the requirements is that cryptocurrencies do not enter into the monetary circuit in Mauritius. There are a number of reasons why we do that, including standards that have been set by international setting organizations. At the same time, it is a matter of monetary policy, and there would be haywire if some of the cryptos go into the monetary circuit. Accordingly, when we grant a digital asset exchange license in Mauritius, we ask for fiat to go in, fiat to go out, but in the midst of it, during the transactions, it's all cryptocurrencies. So fiat in, fiat out is the rule that we impose on those licenses that we provide. Within the exchange, they can transact in any cryptocurrencies they want. And I think as a rule of thumb, most of, if not all of the digital asset exchanges across the world have similar rules. So you have an account in the digital asset exchange, your account is in dollars, or it is in pounds, or it is in euros. And then after you have your account, you can transact in any currency, any cryptocurrency you want. But then when you're going to clear them at the end of the day, it is again in fiat. So this is the first one. For the second question, I will defer to Loretta, Rajiv, in terms of which banks or custodians have the digital asset wallet in Mauritius. I think the regulation that the attendee is referring to is the custody of digital asset. The third one is which digital exchanges are in Mauritius. So at this point in time, given the fact that the digital asset marketplace license is not yet promulgated by the FSC, all of the digital asset exchanges come to the EDB to be licensed under the Sandbox, jointly by the FSC, EDB, and Bank of Mauritius. So as at now, we have 2 entities that we have licensed. It is Fintech Iceberg and Red Dot. It's a mixture of local and international. Both of them are international consortium. They are not yet operational. They have already been provided the licenses. Normally, when we provide the license, then after that they start incorporating all the ancillary companies and entities in Mauritius. They would open their bank accounts in Mauritius, and they would set up their physical presence in Mauritius and their operations. We have substance requirements in Mauritius, so it would take some time after they are provided with the license to start operating, but they are on good progress. And we monitor it at the level of the FSC, the Bank of Mauritius, and the Economic Development Board. Related to that, I think I'll take your last question, Rajiv. I think the attendee mentioned that the FSC has opened up for digital asset, but there is a limitation at the level of the Bank of Mauritius. So how these pan out in terms of these institutional arrangements. If I may answer on this one as well, and you know, if Loretta wish to answer, she can later on. But I think I am not sure that there is a limitation whatsoever for digital asset at the level of the Bank of Mauritius. Actually, if there is a bank which has been licensed by the Bank of Mauritius, they wish to conduct digital asset custody of digital asset, they would have to apply for a license at the level of the Financial Services Commission. So these two regulatory institutions coexist. There is no such thing that if you have a license from the Bank of Mauritius, there is a blanket forbidding at the level of the Bank of Mauritius of not allowing them to have another license at the level of the Financial Services Commission. This is true even now for securities, custody of securities. So the banks can act as custodian of securities, conventional securities in Mauritius. So they may be regulated by the Bank of Mauritius, but at the same time, they have a license from the Financial Services Commission. So I think this answers the questions, Rajiv. And over to Loretta for the custody of digital asset.
Yes, I think, you know, Loretta, is there anything you'd like to add on those questions?
Yes, so the first thing I'm going to be very clear, in our regulation around a digital asset, a cryptocurrency is a subset of a digital asset, but the cryptocurrencies are not legal tender. So they have the characteristics more of commodities. We treat them as a commodity. They're not currency. So a cryptocurrency has no impact on the Bank of Mauritius for a start. So that's not legal tender. The Bank of Mauritius regulates the banks and monetary policy and everything to do with money or currency, as you like to say, and we regulate the non-banking institutions. So the Bank of Mauritius are actually deploying at the moment a pilot on the CBDC. The bank is not anti-digital assets, they're not anti-blockchain. If anything, they've been very open and very collaborative and very accepting and also of digital assets. But as we said before, we say that cryptocurrencies are not legal tender. So that is a very important thing to note. If we say cryptocurrency has the characteristics more of a commodity, we as the non-bank regulator will regulate things like commodities and securities. Security tokens are just securities. They're digital forms of security, so they fall under the absolute parameter of the Securities Act. So I think that takes out the confusion. Banks enter into their own contracts with their clients. I think there was a call about which banks will have bank accounts. It's up to the individual banks to decide whether your company and your risk is acceptable for the bank to enter into that contractual relationship. That's got nothing to do with the Bank of Mauritius or us as the regulator. That is contractual decision by the bank that you deal with. We have a number of custodial and licenses in the pipeline at the moment. They are, as I said, the custody of a digital asset is not the custody of money like a bank holds, but it's a custody of a digital asset. So we have a number of those, but that is under the Financial Services Commission, not the Bank of Mauritius. I hope that answered that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Loretta, and thanks Faraz as well. You know, for we are here. I mean, you all have our contact details. So if you do have any further questions in the future, feel free to reach out to us, even to Michal and the others as well. So I think we have now reached the end of this webinar. On behalf of the Mauritius High Commission, the Economic Development Board, the Mauritius Africa FinTech Hub, Fintech Australia, Loretta from the FSC, and Fintech Technologies as well. I'd like to thank all our viewers and speakers for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope that our viewers, fintech companies in Australia who are with us today, have been able to learn how they could expand into Africa and what are the opportunities that exist for them. So with that, I'd like to thank all our attendees and also thank for those who have been submitting their questions. Thank you very much, and I wish you well. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.